I hope you guys are well. You know, I always feel like when you come to church and the pastor's not speaking, it's disappointing. So hopefully you don't have those thoughts right now. Um, so yeah, and I also want to say, yes, thank you, God. Anyways, I also want to say, I want to take credit for Kevin and Megan because I married them. Just saying. Same. Yep. So, but look, many of you may not know me because I haven't spoke on Sunday morning in a while, but my name is Cody. I'm now the Connections pastor, and so really what I do is just help people really not just come on Sunday morning, but rather really participate in the life of the church. And I let people know kind of their next steps, like, you know, some of you may not know, we have groups here, right? And we have ways you can serve. We have ways you can give. Well, as Matt just discussed. And so I kind of just help bring clarity around those particular things here. That's kind of my new role. And so a little plug for myself. If you have any questions about those types of things, make sure you grab me after the service, and I'll talk with you about that. Maybe we can grab coffee and hang out. I always like to have new friends, so I would love to be your friend. But anyways, so we're going to be wrapping up this series called the Book of Mark, and it literally is what it says. We've been walking through the Book of Mark, and very creative. And we've been kind of, you know, the Book of Mark is about the life of Jesus. We've been looking at different stories within that book and just letting God pour into our church. But last Sunday, I was at Matt's house watching Game 7, and he told me I was preaching this week, and I was like, why are you trying to ruin Game 7 right now? Why are you throwing that on me? He said, I want you to know what it's like to have, because I was also babysitting his kids. He just was taking the whole week off from his responsibilities. That's all it was. And he goes, I want you to know what it's like to have 4 kids and prepare a sermon. So hopefully this goes well, because I went from 0 to 4. So he told me that, and so the next morning I started looking at really the last chapter of Mark where we'll be, and I honestly felt like God was really speaking into my circumstances and kind of what I'm walking through right now. And so in just a moment, I'm going to share a little bit about that. It's going to be really raw, and I hope you guys hear my heart through that. But I really believe that there's this declaration of hope in the last chapter that man, we've just got to get and we've got to grasp. And so I'm going to pray, and then we're just going to jump right in. God, I just ask that right now you prepare all of our hearts, including mine, Father, to hear your word, for you to speak. God, this is not a presentation. This is literally your words being spoken to your people. And so I pray that you remove all barriers that may try to stop that. And so, God, I just ask that you soften our hearts, and really above all else, that you show us who Jesus is today. Amen. So a couple of years ago, I moved to Gloucester. Many of you guys, we all know where Gloucester is. And right now it's fiesta time, so it's a little crazy. And my wife and I live right downtown, so it's very loud. And everyone just wants to park in front of our house. I'm not bitter. But you know, my wife and I have lived there a couple years. We love it, and many of you know this, but we actually hope and believe that God's called us to plant a church in Gloucester. And many of you know this, and I know that you know this because those of you, I've been here a couple years, I always get a question from many of you, and the question always is, hey, Cody, like, when are you actually going to plant a church? Right? Because many of you have heard us talk about this now for some time, and I get it all the time. It's like, the most annoying question you can get as a church planter is like, hey, when are you going to launch? It's like, I don't know. Every time I hear that, I honestly want to bang my head against the wall. But the frustrating part is I actually thought I knew, and I actually had plans to actually launch this fall. But as I started pressing into God, he made it clear that was just not going to happen. See, what happened is several months ago, I realized that if I was going to actually plant a church this fall, I needed to submit myself to some godly men who had planted churches, and also Netcast requires that. So, you know, it's like one of those things that's like, hey, man, you should do this, but like, you're going to do this. So it's all good. But I wanted to, honestly. I was looking forward to these processes. And really, they call them assessments. And so I submitted myself to two of these. I sat down with godly men who planted churches, and they literally get all up in your junk. They ask you hard questions. They ask your wife hard questions. And then, so about a month ago, I went through my last assessment. And I got the report back. They give you a nice little report that has your future in it. It's really cute. They send it over email. And so a couple weeks ago, I got my last report back, and it said literally the same thing that the first report said. And so let me summarize it for you so I don't have to bore you all day long about my baggage. So they said this. They go, listen, Cody, we believe that you're going to be a great pastor one day. We believe that you're called. We believe and see and affirm this God moving in you to go to Gloucester, and we get all that. However, we do not recommend that you plant a church anytime soon. We actually do not see any level of readiness in your life or your marriage because it's so young. And what we want you to do is take the next, however long it is, to really take church planning and really put it in this box and put it in the shelf and not even look at it, not even think about it, not even work towards it anymore, and also just absolutely focus on your personal development in the season of life that you're about to enter. Now, that season of life I'm about to enter is my wife and I are going to have our first kid here in a few weeks. So that's, can you guys imagine me with a kid? I don't know. It's going to be interesting. And so that's what they said. Now, you've got to understand the implications of what those recommendations are. See, I as they're kind of downloading the report to me, because they have a bunch of people sit around and tell you your future, and then you're kind of like hearing it, and see, what I know is that the organization that's been backing my salary for the majority of the time since I've been here, the majority of it, right, it's connected to that guy that was here on the video, is no longer going to be able to fund me because I no longer have a timeline. They're very timeline based, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually very practical. It's very wise for them. And so they have to pull out funding me. But also, my wife and I really believe that when we had a baby, that she needed to be home. And it was the best thing that we believe for our family. And quite frankly, daycare is about as expensive as her salary. It's crazy. I don't know how you people do it. But, and so I'm hearing all this, and all I'm hearing is, oh crap, in August, I'm losing 87% of our income. And so, man, I am massively overwhelmed. I am stressed out, and quite frankly, I felt like a failure. And here's why. Many people think, you guys have known me for a couple years now since I've been here, and many people think that because I'm so young that this church planting thing came out, over these last couple years. But when I was 19, when I got out of rehab, God told me that I was going to plant a church. And so I started preparing at 19 to plant a church. I'm 25 now. That's 6 years. And after 6 years of preparing, I'm still not ready. That's what godly men are telling me. So I was like literally, I'm a failure because now I'm supposed to be a father here in a couple weeks, right? And I'm supposed to provide for my family. And now because I'm not ready, here I am about to start out being a father with no way to even provide and no certainty of what the future holds. And nothing. And I remember just sitting there with this ball of uncertainty over me and just feeling really hopeless and not knowing what to do. But here's the thing. I know that in life, we all go through things like this, right? Where life is good, you're moving along in life, and then all of a sudden something happens, okay? And when that something happens, it drastically changes everything and creates this massive uncertainty in your life, right? Where, like you and your spouse get married and you start having kids and everything's great and you're hopeful and it's exciting. Then all of a sudden, now there's this tension in your marriage and you can't really pinpoint it, but all you know is you don't see a way forward. Or you're going through life and all of a sudden the doctor tells you have cancer. Or you thought you were going to do this certain career and it just didn't work out anymore. Or you have a margin financially, and then all of a sudden something happens, and now you no longer have a margin, and now you are paycheck to paycheck, and it's massively uncertain and extremely hopeless. Because that's the problem with this, right? Is that when you deal with these situations and you don't know kind of what to do next, it creates a hopelessness that causes you a lot of emotional distress, a lot of stress in itself, and a lot of pain. Because you're like, I don't even know what to do with this. I don't even know where to turn. And you kind of just feel stuck. And so what I want to talk about today is I want us to look at where can we find hope in the midst of uncertainty? Like, where can we have hope in the midst of uncertainty where you don't even know how you're going to move forward? It feels hopeless. In that tension, where can you have the hope? Because at the end of the day, uncertainty is a certainty. This is a part of life that we all go through. Things happen in life that are outside of your control, right? We cannot change our circumstances. Things just happen. And here's the other thing. I don't have this hook at the end. I'm not going to tell you where I found hope and then look what God did, because I still don't know. I still don't know what those things are going to look like. I still am losing that much money. I'm still very uncertain about the future. But here's what I do know, that ultimately, that I can have hope as a Christian in the midst of that. A hope that gives me courage and boldness to continue forward in a way that glorifies God. And so I want us to see that. And I believe we're going to see it in the last chapter of Mark. I know that we've been in this series several weeks, but I want to kind of review a little bit of the context of Mark, okay? The book of Mark is in the New Testament, and it's one of the four Gospels, right? You got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, the Gospels were written by guys who either knew Jesus or knew of him. I'm pretty sure that John was the only one who actually knew Jesus, but I don't know. The Gospel cops will yell at me afterwards if I'm wrong. But it's usually, they knew him or knew of him, and they wrote down the story of Jesus as they knew it, okay? So what you get is four different perspectives on one story, the life of Jesus. Now that shows you how authentic the Gospels are, because if, for instance, this is morbid, I know, but if I throw my Bible at you, okay, and then I ask four people to stand right here and tell everyone what I just did, you're going to get four different wordings and four different perspectives of how I just threw my Bible at someone, okay? Because people are different. They see things differently, and that's what you get in the Gospels. So the book of Mark, when you read it, it's drastically different from any of the other Gospels. It's really short. It moves quickly. It doesn't give a lot of details. Mark is not a disciple. He was literally a helper. And so he's writing down the story, the life of Jesus as he knew it. But his goal in that was very specific. He wanted to display the kingship of Christ. And that was his main goal throughout the book. Now, it's interesting because the time he wrote the book was in a time where people were literally killing Christians. Like Nero was doing some crazy stuff with some fire and all kinds of stuff. People were dying left and right. Paul and Peter were literally a few days or a few months away from being executed, okay? But in the midst of all that junk going on, Mark sits down and writes this story about the life of Jesus and displays his kingship in a powerful way. And I believe that the last chapter is like the stamp of, yeah, he's king. Now, in order to understand Mark 16, you've got to understand Mark 15. That goes for all of the Bible, right? So what happened was, Jesus was just arrested, and he was nailed to a cross and murdered. It's very, very tragic. And for Jesus, he knew his whole life that moment was coming, that he was going to die on a cross. The point of that was, as God, he was going to be the perfect sacrifice for our sins. He was literally taking upon our punishment on the cross. Now, the thing that many people don't understand is that the disciples and the followers of that day did not really know that's what was going to happen to Jesus. Now, Jesus told them that over and over again. In Mark 8, Jesus tells them literally, I'm going to die, I'm going to suffer, all this stuff's going to happen. And Peter pulls Jesus aside and rebukes him and says, no, you're not going to die. Like, this is not, and you're reading that, you're like, do they not understand? And the answer to that is no, they don't. Because they're like us, right? They're not very smart when it comes to understanding divine mysteries. All right, they don't really grasp who Jesus is, what he's going to do. Quite frankly, they see Jesus as a guy who's walking on water, turning water into wine. He's doing all these cool miracles. He's talking about building a kingdom, right? And so for him to say he's going to die is silly to them because they're like, dude, you could just literally kind of wave your hand and people are dead. Like, you're not going to die. We're going to build a kingdom, right? You're talking about building a kingdom. And they were kind of right, but they didn't play out how they thought, because first Jesus had to die. And so what happens is when Jesus dies, the disciples are devastated. The followers, it wasn't just the 12 disciples, it was a lot of people who were following Jesus. Jesus wasn't a hobo living in a corner asking for attention. There were a lot of people who were interested in him. A lot of people followed him. Every time he showed up, people were there, right? He had a lot of people that were committed to him. And so when that happened, when he died, it was massively, it was just so, they were so devastated. One gospel says that they all just scattered. Because at the end of the day, they were feared for their own lives because they were scared they were going to be killed for even knowing Jesus. So what happens is, at the end of Mark 15, Jesus is buried in a tomb. And then Mark 16 starts, and Mark's going to tell a story about 3 women and when they go to the tomb. And I want us to see kind of how this unfolds, because we're going to find our hope here. So in verse 1 it says, when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome, is that Salome? You guys don't know how long I practiced that name, and I just butchered it still. So, but you know what? You don't know either. I was saying salami for the longest time. Okay? So we're going to go with Salome. That's just what it's going to be like today. Salome bought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. And there they were saying to one another, hey, who's going to roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb? So you got these 3 women, okay? They were followers of Jesus. At some point, they kind of committed to following him and left their stuff and like, man, we're in. And what happens is when Jesus he dies and he's buried, they get some spices. Now, I read this and I think of hipsters, okay? So it's weird to me that they're bringing spices to a tomb. But it's actually kind of a cultural thing in this day. But what's happening is bodies smell, okay? Bodies smell after a couple days. And so for them, this is really a part of the mourning process. They're going to cover the body and cover his odor on the 3rd day, because by now it's going to start smelling. So they want to kind of cover it up out of respect. That's why they use the word anoint here. And so they ultimately are just kind of, it's kind of like a wake is to a funeral in our culture. It's kind of just part of what they're trying to do. But what I don't like about what Mark says here is he doesn't express really the emotions of the moment. Now think about this, okay? If this is kind of morbid. I'm trying not to be, but think about your loved one dying, right? Every time my wife thinks about me dying, she cries, so she's probably going to cry. Are you crying yet? No, not today? If you think about your loved one dying and then having to go 3 days later, okay, to put spices on their body to cover their odor, that's pretty devastating, right? In John 20:11, John, this is, again, all the Gospels tell different perspectives of the same events. And John says this, he goes, now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. And as she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb. So what you see here is there's a lot of emotions here, okay? This is not a happy thing to do. They're mourning, right? They're devastated. They're overwhelmed. Why? Because ultimately they committed everything to this guy. He required them to do that, and they thought he was going to build a kingdom. They thought that he was going to be their savior. They even kind of thought he was God, but all they know now is he's dead, and he's gone. And all they know now is that the world around them is trying to kill them. So when they leave this tomb, it's like, what's next for them? I mean, talk about uncertainty and hopelessness. But watch what happens as they approach the tomb. In verse 4, it says, "And looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled back, and it was very large. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe, and they were alarmed," and you would be too, because that's freaky. "And he said to them, 'Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified.'" This is important. You should probably highlight this. You could probably get this tattooed on you, and it would be okay. "He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. And there you will see him, and just as he told you." And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. So here they are. They walk into the tomb, right? They got their spices. And all of a sudden, there's this, what scholars believe is an angel standing there, right? That's a pretty scary thing. And there's no body to anoint with spices, okay? And they're like, "What is going on?" And the angel's like, "What are you doing here?" And they're like, "Man, we've got the spices. We're going to do the body thing. We're going to cover the odor." And he's like, no. He's not here. He's alive. He got up from the grave. Did he not tell you that he was going to meet you in Galilee? What are you doing here? And so immediately the women, they're kind of filled with conflicting emotions, right? They're one gospel says they are filled with joy, okay? But they're trembling, they're in awe, but they're afraid. Why? Well, because the guy that they loved just died and now he's alive. That's a pretty freaky thing to encounter. But on top of that, there's an angel standing before them. And so, it's like, I don't even know what to do with that. And so they're like, all these emotions, like, man, they're excited, they're in awe, they can't believe it. Another gospel says that they were like, kind of talking like, "Hey, I think he did mention something about being alive." But then they're like, as soon as they said that, they're like, "But someone probably stole the body," right? And so they have no clue what's really happening here. And so Mark says when they leave, they're not telling anyone, they're afraid. But we know, if you read the other accounts, what Mark is saying is they're not going to tell anyone outside the disciples and Peter, because they know that if they do, it's probably not going to go well for them, because a lot of those people want to kill them just like they killed Jesus. So they're afraid, they're scared, they're in awe, they're filled with joy, and they kind of just leave like, what in the world does this mean? He was dead. We saw him die. We saw him get buried. And now he's alive. See, the story doesn't end here. And what happens is many of these disciples, including, when I say disciples, like the actual disciples, now there's 11, and all of these followers are having a lot of doubt surrounding the resurrection, because, again, that is a stupid idea to think that someone could die and come back to life. And so what Jesus does is he actually appears to many of those followers. Historical evidence shows that it was probably around 500 people that Jesus appeared to, and he started talking to them about different things. Listen, if you want proof that Jesus died and he got up, in my mind, and there's a lot of different angles you can go at it with this, and we're not going to talk a lot about the apologetic side of this today, but I just want to mention that one of the greatest evidences is the fact that he appeared to so many people. Because there's actually guys like Josephus who kind of mention this idea that Jesus died and he appeared to all of his followers after his death. And it's like, well, wait a second. Did he just say what I think he said? And it's like, yeah, he just said that the resurrection happened, okay? So Jesus goes out, he appears to disciples, and he starts teaching them different things. At the beginning of chapter 1 of Acts is about this as well. The writer Luke is describing what happens. It says he begins to teach them different things for a certain period of time. But one of the things that he does is he unpacks to them, hey man, this is what it means now that I have died and come back to life. And he shows them really the big idea behind the resurrection and then tells them what to do. And Mark mentions it a little bit But I want to go to Matthew 28. And many of you have read this passage. Many of you have heard it here at Netcast. But I wonder if you understand the context. And it's everything to do with the resurrection. And in verse 17, Matthew 28, it says, "And when they saw him," they being the disciples, "they worshiped, but some doubted." That is realistic. Because, I mean, some of you could see something right before you and you still be like, I don't know, right? Like Uncle Dan's like that. Dan here on staff, he just doubts everything, right? I love him to death. I love you, man. But you know, some people are like that, and then some people are like, they don't even really need evidence. They just believe everything. They're very gullible. They're like, oh, I'm going to worship, and so that's realistic. Some worship, some doubt, and then verse 18. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the very end of the age." Okay, what Jesus is saying here is he's sitting them down. He's saying, look, I know you don't really understand what's going on here right now. I know there's a lot of mystery around the fact that, okay, I was dead, now I'm alive. What does that mean exactly? But let me be clear. All authority on heaven and earth has been given to me. He's saying the resurrection proves that I am, that I am the Lord of Lords, the King of Kings. I'm the God who created the stars. I'm holding the universe literally in my hand. I've entered flesh to reveal myself to you guys. He's saying, I am the God of the universe that you kind of think is there when you look at the stars. He's like, yeah, I'm that guy. But also, he's also saying to them, look, I'm going to be with you forever. He's saying, look, the resurrection proves and shows you guys how much I love and pursue you. That I would come here and experience the death that I died, but come back to life so that you and I could eternally always be with each other. That nothing, not even death, the greatest power of this world, could get in between you and me. He's like, man, I'm the God, I'm the King of Kings, and I love you. And I'm going to be with you always. So the disciples are sitting here, and they got all this stuff over their head, this uncertainty. And it's in this moment where I got to think, or actually know that it clicks for them because based on what they do next. Right? It's in this moment that they realize that their hope in life and in this, all of this massive uncertainty can only be really found in the person of Jesus. Because what they do next, their uncertainty here is great, but what they do next is absolutely insane. Because they go to the very people that killed Jesus and say, hey, I just want to let you guys know he's actually alive and we love that guy and you need him. And if you don't believe in him, you're going to die and go to hell. Now, who does that unless you have hope in the guy? Like, hey, he died and he got up, so you can do whatever you want to me, but I'm with the guy who came back to life. See, their hope was found only in the person of Jesus based on his story, his death, his resurrection. And so we ask this question, right? Where in the world is our hope in that moment when uncertainty comes and when life happens and we don't know what to do and we're standing in the midst of hopelessness? And I say the only hope, the only place we can find that true hope is in the actual person of Jesus, in him, because the resurrection told us that he's in control of everything. So everything's outside of our control and everything's uncertain to us, but in him, everything is certain and everything's in his control. And the good news is he's a good God who loves us deeply, who came and joined our story and overcame death just so he could be with us forever. So I don't know where else you're going to put your hope but in that. And so over these last several weeks, I mean, it's been a long month for me, okay? And you know, this is one of those things that I can't speak for every pastor, but I feel like in church, a lot of times when pastors tell stories and use them in sermons, they've already come out of it, right? And so I was conflicted, like God, like, I don't really want to talk about this right now, okay? Last thing I want to do is tell a couple hundred people on Sunday my problems right now. But I'm telling you, literally why I am hopeful. And what I mean by that, literally why I get up in the morning and why I continue forward doing what I'm doing is because my hope is in the fact that although all this is outside of my control and I'm very uncertain about it. I mean, the idea of me being a father is scary in itself, but the idea that I don't have the money to be a father now is just crazy. But my hope is in the fact that he's literally in control and he loves me and he literally said he would be with me forever. So I'm going to be all right. I'm going to be all right. And so my question today that we've got to wrestle with is this idea, guys, do you believe that? Do you honestly trust that he is in control and that he loves you in a way that you just can't even imagine? Because that is when the hopelessness of uncertainty fades in your life, because you know I'm going to be all right. Now, faith and trust is a tricky thing. At Netcast, we believe that, I don't want to speak for the whole church, but I'm assuming that many of us would say this, but that faith to believe in salvation is really not anything you did. You know, in Ephesians, it tells us that by grace through faith, not by faith through grace, but by grace through faith. In Peter, 1 Peter, it talks about how God caused people to be born again. So it's this reality that when you believe, it's because God regenerated you and you respond by saying, yeah, I want him, I need him, okay? But now, as a Christian, now that you're alive in him, there are levels to faith. And I'm not being weird and like prosperity gospel, and if you have certain levels of faith, you're going to get certain rewards. That's stupid. But what I am saying is that there are uncertainties in life that require greater levels of trust than you may currently have. The idea that God will never give you more than you can handle is very stupid. That's my simple point of view there. It's because you don't see that anywhere in the Bible. I mean, you think the disciples really had what it took to go on and do what they did? No. So it's in those moments, right, that God puts us in a situation of uncertainty to stretch our trust in him and create a greater dependence and faith in him as a believer now that he's given us faith. So the question is how in the world do you stretch it in the midst of it? And I'm going to be really simple, okay, because I'm not that smart. The only way I know how to tell you to grow your faith when you're in it is, man, you've got to walk with him through it. Too many people start doing their own thing and trying to find different little places to place their hope and find, oh, this is what will happen. Oh, okay, if this, okay, or you know what, because of that thing, I'll be okay. And it's like you're not trusting him. And what I realized is my current situation, right? The reason why I was hopeless was because the situation called for a level of trust that I do not have yet. But what I'm seeing, even this week, is that, God, I literally need you because I don't know what's going to happen. And he's been stretching it. And he's been causing me to have a greater faith to a point where I can stand and say, I'm really hopeful and I can't wait to see what God does. But all I can say is, man, you've got to walk with him through that, right? Because when you do that, what you're doing is you're worshiping him despite your circumstances, okay? Practically speaking, that's like getting alone with God and through prayer, through reading the Bible, reading the scriptures, in biblical community, talking about it, letting people know what you're going through, and doing that. And what you're doing is you're choosing to walk with him through that, and he begins to just stretch you. And then you walk out and you're like, dang, I can't believe I had hope in the midst of that. You ever seen someone who's going through hell, and it's like, how in the world can they actually smile right now? And it's because of this. And so I'm going to close with this verse. I'm actually over time. I'm sorry, Travis. I told him, I was like, listen, I'm going to be 35 minutes and done. And I'm 35 minutes and not done. So he's okay. All right. So Travis, you can come out. I see you back there. Anyways, I'm going to close with this verse. And I hope it comes on the screen, yeah. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Look, do you believe that? Because at the end of the day, that's what we've got to believe. That, and here's the thing, the whole idea of good there, that's not, God's going to always make things where you feel good at the end, okay? It's not true. Called according to his purpose. Did you know that God's main objective in life is to make you more like him and make you more dependent upon him? And one thing that makes us do that in life is pain. There's nothing that's going to refine you more than suffering. So yeah, God does ordain this idea and put you in situations that it's so painful, and the only thing you can do is trust him and depend on him. And so in that moment though, do you really trust that it's for your good? Because if you don't, you're not going to be very hopeful. So at the end of the day, we've got to wrestle with that. So my heart today for Christians is for us to leave here and see, there's a tension here because a lot of you know and you have the knowledge that Jesus got up from the grave. And so it's one of those messages where you wrestle with it because you're like, they're already aware, right? This is not one of those movies at the end, the mind blowing. Like, you guys all knew what was going to happen, okay? But I think sometimes we don't really realize what happened and what it means. And so my heart today is that we would just walk out of here knowing that, man, that God is alive, that the person of Jesus is not dead anymore. And what that means for us is we're going to be okay no matter what comes, no matter what uncertainties happen. But I also know this. There's some of you here today who are not Christians and you don't believe, and you kind of came here and you're here, but you know that you don't really believe in this stuff. It's kind of weird. You get people raising your hands, you get stuff going on, you don't really know what's going on. And I just want to be honest with you. When I talk about hope, there's really not any hope outside Christ, right? This is your life. You're going to live a good life, and you may be successful or not. You may suffer or not. You may be famous or not. You may be rich or not. But at the end of the day, you're going to die and eternally be separated from God in hell. It's not very hopeful, okay? That's why the gospel is called good news, because the good news is that the person of Jesus died so that we could die the death we should have because of sin, and so that we can be brought back into relationship with God and be right before him based on what Jesus did, not what we do, because we can't do it. But he also got up from the grave. So now we can be with him in the midst of all that. And so my hope for you today is that you would actually believe that, because I believe what it says in 1 Peter, and I believe that some of you right now are feeling caused to be born again, like there's this pulling in you, this wow, I walked in here and wanted nothing to do with this, but now I kind of want this Jesus guy. And so what I want to do is I want to pray for the Christians, and I want to pray for the non-Christians that you guys would believe. And then when I get done praying, we're actually going to do communion. So if the people serving communion want to go ahead and come up here, I want to pray over the Christians and non-Christians. God, for the Christian in the room, I just ask that you soften our hearts, that you not let us believe the lie that we're just okay and everything's good in life, because I know that stuff happens and it could happen tomorrow. That I pray that their minds were open today, that hope, they were reminded of the hope that we have in you. And God, I pray that you remind those of us in uncertainty right now that we would trust you and we would hold on to you, because at the end of the day, you're all we can really hold on to. And God, for the non-Christian in the room today, God, I just ask supernaturally right now that you bring them from death to life. And if that's you, I just want to help you maybe have a conversation with God, because I know that sometimes it can be weird. So maybe you could just say something like, God, forgive me. God, I see you now, and I believe, and I want you. But Jesus, we love you, and we thank you for what you did today, and we thank you for your word, God. And we just ask that you continue to bring your spirit here as we continue in worship. So in your name I pray, amen. So listen, now what we want to do is continue worship through communion and through song. And so let's keep in mind what this is about. Look, if you're not a believer, it doesn't make sense for you to take part in communion. It's actually discouraged in Scripture. But communion is this idea that the bread, the juice, is done in remembrance of his body and his blood on the cross, his death. And so as we stand, and then as we come forward, you guys can stand. Sorry, you can stand. And we're going to come forward in a moment. But I want us to do this. And as we're doing this, remember that the death of Jesus and what he did on the cross was enough for us. That his works are enough. Okay? And then as we go back to our seats and worship, I pray that you remembered, hey, he's not dead anymore. All right? And so you guys can, as I leave, you can go out from the left, the last row. It'll be your left, my right. But you go out, come down, and then you'll go up the opposite way. But let's continue worship.
The king of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, he is my song. Let the king of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, he is my song, 'cause you are good.
for your grace. God, it's only by your grace and your mercy that we have breath. God, it's your breath in our lungs, and that's why we declare that you are good. And so, Father, we honor you with everything we have this morning, God. We give all of our inadequacies and all of our shortcomings and all of our failings to you, Father God. We just thank you for your grace and your mercy, and it's in your name that we do any of this stuff. And so in your name we say amen. You guys are dismissed. Don't forget on your way out, there's a welcome tent. You can find out more information. Get plugged into a group. Go to Discover class. Yeah, we want to get to know you more. And so take a step out there.